Held on the 27th of February. I've been there for half an hour. Is it your wish I sign them as true record? Great. Thank you. Apologies for absence. Emma?
We have apologies from councillors John Fraser, Pat Frost, Stephen Hill, Mike Hodge and Julia Potts.
Thank you, Emma. And disclosure of interest, just make a quick comment. When making a decision on this application, do consider the matter with an open mind on the facts before the meeting in which the decision is to be made, listening to the advice of relevant parties, including advice from officers, and taking all relevant information into consideration, remaining objective and making decisions on merit. And Emma, can I have declarations of interest?
Yes, all members of the committee declare a non-pecuniary interest as they are colleagues of Councillor Martin Lear. Martin Lear is in attendance now but has a pecuniary interest and will be leaving the room for consideration of this item.
Thank you.
Also, probably Farnham Town councillors declare a non-pecuniary interest as members of Farnham Town Council.
Question by members of the public.
None received.
Question from members?
None received.
There are no relevant updates. There's no performance against government target change. Applications for planning permission. Should there be a site inspection beyond Tuesday, 22nd of May? Applications not subject to public speaking. Item B1, WA 2018-2176, 4 Pine Grove, Lower Bourne, GU 10 3RG. It's on pages 5 to 14 of your agenda. Propose the erection of a games room as amended by plans received on the 12th of March 2019. And to introduce this, Ruth Dovey. It's all yours, Ruth.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Just before I start, if I can just draw your attention to the fact there is a written update sheet which just reflects some amended plans which were submitted, which were referenced in the report. It's just that the actual plans themselves, which include some additional bifold doors, were not inserted within the report, so apologies for that. So if I take to my presentation, you can see on the screen there's the site location plan. The site comprises a detached dwelling within a relatively large plot of land within the developed area of Farnham. This is an aerial photograph of the site, so you can see that the area has a relatively green feel with significant mature trees in the vicinity, and it is designated as part of the South Farnham Arcadian area. So the blue square on the aerial photograph is the approximate location of the outbuilding. On the application, it's described as a games room, so it's effectively a timber outbuilding within the garden. So here are a couple of photographs from within the site, looking from the house towards where the outbuilding would be located. And photograph A, in photograph A, you can see a climbing frame. That would be removed, and that would be the approximate location of the outbuilding. And photograph B, you can just see the climbing frame just further into the distance. So here are the block plan elevations accompanying the planning application. So effectively it's a timber story, single story outbuilding, which is approximately 40 square metres in footprint. If you look at the block plan, you'll see that there are quite a few dots on the block plan, and they are reflective of the fact that there are TPO'd trees on the site. So the line of dots that go along the shared boundary with number 5 Pine Grove are TPO'd trees. And then you can see a section through that shows the height of the building relative to the neighbouring property and the boundary treatment there. So in terms of the impact on the trees, this has been considered by our arboricultural officer, Andy Clout. The applicant is proposing a no-dig construction method, and our arboricultural officer is happy that with a no-dig construction method, there would be no harmful impact to the TPO'd trees. In terms of the appearance of the building, officers are satisfied that it's in keeping with the character and appearance of the area. It's a relatively modest outbuilding within a relatively large residential garden. And with regard to impact on the neighbours, the distance from the boundary coupled with the single-storey height of the building, officers are satisfied it wouldn't have any overbearing impacts. So the matters for consideration for the committee are the impact of the building on the character and appearance of the area, and in particular South Farnham Arcadian area, the impact on neighbouring residential amenity, and the impact on the TPO trees. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, over to you.
Peter.
Councillor Coburn.
Sorry, I do write my long lists. I was just moaning to Southern, but the chairman never reads them, so I do apologise, but I have got you, Mr. Hymer, for the next person. Right. I just wanted, could I just go back? Well, let me start with this. South Farnham Arcadian area. Could we just go back to the picture? Because I just thought it sort of sums up what I'm always trying to say, right, that lovely, the aerial photograph. Because this is the Bourne to a T, which is why it's included as part of the South Farnham Arcadian area. Not my choice of words, but you can see why. The whole of the Bourne is a big bowl. You've got the Bourne at the bottom, the Bourne, the stream, river, we'd like to say at times, and then we all live up the steep hills. And as I was saying earlier, it's why we've got one leg shorter than the other. It is always up a hill wherever you are. So whatever you're looking at, there's always an impact below or above, as well as side from side. Having said that, I don't think there's going to be any impact from this games room at all. But number 5 is at a lower level from number 4 on Pine Grove, and Lodge Hill Road lies even further down towards the Bourne, and it carries on like that. And this is why it's always difficult when you're looking at these images to understand the full impact of the trees. And if you could just do the next one, would you mind, Ruth, please? Again, you can see the setting against which most of the houses in the Bourne sit. There's an awful lot. When you take a picture of them, you'll have these pine trees at the back. One QC at a planning appeal tried to explain that pines were not native to the Bourne, but you'd be hard pushed not to accept that they're part of the character. So, sorry, I was just using that, Ruth, because it was such a perfect example of what the Bourne looks like if you don't live there, well, or even if you do live there. Having said all of that, it is the South Farnham Arcadian nature area, and this relatively small, as you say, games room, I do not think will alter the character in one way. I can understand the number 5 being worried about it, but the separation is 2 metres, I gather, from Ruth. We have got the TPO trees. We have got Andy Clout satisfied that the trees will not be harmed in the erection of this building, and so I have no problems with it. Thank you.
Councillor Hyman.
Yes, Chairman, I thought it was fairly straightforward, but just a couple of things that concern me in as much as when I see the size of the garden, I wonder why this is being placed in that position where, you know, obviously there is potential for impact on the tree roots and and on the neighbour. I just wonder why it wasn't somewhere else, but I suppose that's not in front of us. So, I mean, do we have to look at alternatives, alternative solutions? I know under EIA we do, but I don't think under normal applications, perhaps that there isn't any necessity that the applicant describes how they have looked at possible alternatives with lesser impact. I know the tree officers seems to be happy, so that should be good enough, but it'd be far better if we didn't have to worry about the trees at all. But my main issue with this is I've found a contradiction here in as much as the plan which shows, well, the main plan for the development, we were sent out an updated one showing the eastern elevations, glazed doors as well. In the bottom left corner of that, the writing at the very bottom corner, which you can't read, does say that there's, well, on my, it says Number 5, 2.65 metres close-boarded high fence, or CB high fence, I suppose that's close-board high fence. 2.65 metres, but it looks like some of it's underground. And when you show those pictures up there, I suppose the clever thing to say is that I can't see the wood for the trees. I can't tell how high this fence is. If I refer you to the bottom of page, was it page 11 or something like that? No, at page 10, it says there is a 1.8 metre high close-boarded fence on the boundary. So that's 1.8 metres high, but you can see also there's a difference in land levels, or from the very, the little picture at the corner. If that's a 1.8 metre high fence, then that's a midget who's next door, and I don't think that's probably the case. I probably shouldn't even say that, but it does look an awfully small person if that's a 1.8 metre fence. But if it's 2.65, maybe that's just a small person. And if some of it's underground, I don't know what it's really showing. So I'd like some clarity on how high is this fence? Can you really see over the top or not? If thank you for clarification, Chairman, because I was going to ask whether that land drops away into number 5, which would lessen the impact, and you've clarified that that is the case. It would lessen the impact because it's lower land. But nevertheless, I think we ought to know whether that's a 1.8 metre high fence, how high it is on the lower side, so to speak, where people might stand against it and see over. The only other thing, if we are minded to grant, I'd ask that we look at condition 5 because of the wording, Chairman. Condition 5 says the outbuilding hereby permitted shall not be occupied at any time other than for purposes ancillary to the use of the property as a residential dwelling. And that sort of implies residential use is okay. Well, if we're putting a residential building out there, there would need to be a SPA allowance and all the rest of it, and we're not doing that, are we? So I don't know whether we ought to clarify the wording to ensure that there is no residential use. You're looking very puzzled, Chairman. Perhaps you'll clarify for me why, and also clarify the height of that fence. Thank you.
I will ask Ruth to do both those things. Ruth?
Thank you, Chair. I have to confess that I haven't actually measured the height of the fence on my site visit, but certainly you cannot. It is a high fence, and I apologise because it is certainly over 1.8 metres in height. And I don't know if it's clear from this photo, but the fence height runs to approximately this position here. So it is a high close-boarded fence. If you scale off the drawings, it's 2.65 metres in height from the application site, and it's 3.2 metres in height from the land level shown on the other side. And I'm satisfied from my site visit that you wouldn't be able to see over that fence and have an obtrusive view of the proposed building. Just with reference to condition 5, so the condition 5 is not stating that this would be used for independent residential purposes. Effectively, it's acknowledging that it is a building that can be used in connection with the residential dwelling that sits within the curtilage. So that is our standard condition to ensure that the use of the outbuilding remains as part and parcel and ancillary to the main residential dwelling on the site.
Sorry, Chairman, I mean, I do apologise, perhaps I didn't explain properly, but my concern is that when you read that, because it says that it's not to be used other than for purposes ancillary to the use of the property as a residential dwelling, then there is perhaps an implication in there that it can be used for residential purposes, and either people can kip in there or stay in there, or that it could have residential use. Of course, we can't allow that. And what I was asking was, because that isn't entirely clear to someone who might look at it in 5 years' time or whatever, could we please tighten that up so to ensure that it is absolutely clear that residential use is not allowed, because otherwise it's a separate dwelling and we have to charge for the spa. I know it's a standard thing. I'm saying perhaps we shouldn't have just the standard wording. That is what I was trying to say. I do apologise if I wasn't clear. Yeah. Thank you.
Before I move to Councillor Coburn, I'd just say if you took the last four words out of that sentence, you've got it. Just Councillor Coburn.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that if you take out the use of the property, the main property, then the way it's phrased, I agree with Councillor Hyman, it could be sort of interpreted slightly differently. I mean, we're basically saying it should be ancillary to the main property, simple as that. You know, the use there, so that it but what I really wanted to do was just to reinforce what Ruth has just said about the height. The number 5 sits really far down, and in fact we've had applications in here, if you remember, for development in the roof at number 5, because it's the roof that threatened to overlook number 4. You know, that is how different the heights are. So, you know, you can put a 1.8 metre fence at one point on the hill, and it would just about screen things. Put it further down the hill, it wouldn't screen anything, you know. I mean, it'd have to be 15, 25 metres high. So, you know, it all depends on what they've got. But as Ruth also pointed out, there is the fence, the hedge and the trees, because both properties are very aware that they need to maintain the screening because of the juxtaposition of the properties. So I don't think there's any problem at all with overlooking in this case.
Councillor Hyman.
I just forgot, actually, could I just ask Ruth if she wouldn't mind clarifying the issue of alternatives? Because, you know, I'm minded on what I see. I'm thinking that probably there is no reason not to grant consent to this. That would be a reasonable planning reason. But do we have to look at alternatives or not? Because, I mean, if I was the neighbour, I would certainly be thinking, why on earth isn't it somewhere else away from the trees and away from my house? That's what I'd be thinking, even if I was a midget matchstick man.
Ruth?
We can only look at what is before us, and if we consider that to be acceptable, which in this instance we do, then we're not under any duty to ask for alternatives. If what is before us is acceptable, then that is what we are effectively judging. And sorry, just to clear up this matter of condition 5, we were just wondering whether it would address your concerns if we reword it as follows. Say the outbuilding hereby permitted shall not be occupied at any time other than for purposes ancillary to the use of the main residential dwelling.
Okay, if that's all, let's move to the recommendation. The recommendation is that subject conditions 1 to 5, as Ruth has just amended there, the outbuilding hereby permitted shall not be occupied at any time other than for the purposes ancillary to the use of the main dwelling. And informatives 1, permission be granted. Those in favour, please show.
Yeah, that's unanimous.
Unanimous. Thank you all very much indeed. That concludes our meeting.